Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Rebecca Smekla, coming to you from the Department of Educational Technology for the School District of Palm Beach County. So great to see you here today with us. Welcome students, welcome teachers. We're really excited to kick off our 2021 virtual learning experiences this week and next week with you. We're going to have all kinds of fun. And today we're going to start off with Loggerhead Marinelife Center. We're coming to you live from Juno Beach. We're going to be seeing and learning all about one of the most populated, densely populated nesting turtles. It's going to be awesome. But before we get started, let's just talk a little bit about our housekeeping today. This session is recorded, so if you have students who want to watch it down the road, it will be on our website, on our YouTube channel. Please engage with us on Twitter at EdTechPBC. If you like us, subscribe. We do have in our chat box today some moderators. They have wrenches by their names. They're going to be able to answer some of your questions. Teachers, please use the chat box to communicate any questions your students may have today. Unfortunately, our students don't have the capability to use the chat for this session, but please put their questions there because we definitely want to hear from them. So I'm very pleased to introduce Emily from Loggerhead Marinelife Center. Again, Emily is live at Juno Beach, so her it could be a little choppy. She might freeze a little bit, but that's okay. We're going to stick here with her. You know how technology can be. Welcome, Emily. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everybody. My name is Emily, and I am the STEM Education Coordinator with Loggerhead Marinelife Center, conveniently located right across the street in Juno Beach, Florida. We are a state-of-the-art sea turtle research and rehabilitation center. So essentially what that means is we take in sick and injured turtles, and our veterinarians will fix them up with our expert treatment plans, and then we'll send them back out into their homes in the ocean, which is really awesome. But today I'm going to be talking with you about something a little different. It's actually nesting season here in South Florida. So we're going to be talking all about nesting do's and don'ts and how the nesting process works for female sea turtles. Now, the nesting season starts March 1st to October 31st, but sea turtles don't have calendars, so sometimes we'll even see them coming up in mid to late February. And our first nesters that we see are leatherback sea turtles. I hope y'all can see that picture pretty well. And these are the largest sea turtles that we see. So there's 7 species in the entire world, 5 that we pretty commonly see in South Florida, and 3 that nest on our beaches, and the leatherbacks are one of them. And then the next nesters to typically come up are loggerheads. And loggerheads are our namesake, and typically, of all the nests that we get on our beach in a given season, the most nests that we see are loggerhead nests. I believe last year we had about almost 17,000 nests on our beach, and 13,000 of those were loggerheads, so quite a bit of those guys. And then lastly, we see our green sea turtles. So our green sea turtles nest probably starting in June, and they can go until the end of the nesting season. So you might be wondering, with that large amount of nests that we see on our beach, how do we keep track of them? 17,000 nests is a lot for our research team to keep track of. So we do this by a couple of ways. So with some of our nests, we actually use this stake here. So for about 12% of our loggerhead nests and our sea turtle nests, we will stake them. And that's because they make up the majority of our nests. And so if we staked everyone, there would be there's a nest about every 3 feet. So people wouldn't be able to enjoy the beach very well because there would be stakes everywhere. And these stakes have meanings to them, so they might look like random letters and numbers to you. But what this means is caretta, which is the scientific species name for loggerhead sea turtles, and then the date. So this was found on June 5th by our research team. And then this note right here just tells you which area of the research area that they were looking at when they found this nest. Now, Loggerhead Marinelife Center has been in charge of 9.5 miles of beach all the way from Jupiter to North Palm Beach since 1989. So for about 32 years, the research team has been in charge of keeping track of all of these nests, which is really awesome because we're able to provide scientists with a lot of information about nesting and hatchling success on our beaches, which is one of the most densely populated nesting beaches in the entire world. Pretty cool. So without further ado, we can kind of go through the steps of nesting. So the first thing that happens is the nesting mama will travel all the way from her foraging grounds, and she will migrate and mate with the male, and then she will come right up on the continental shelf to decide which beach that she wants to nest on. We don't exactly know why they pick the beaches that they do, but there is some characteristics that we know that they like in our beaches more than other beaches. The first one is latitude. So they want to make sure that they're far enough south, that the waters are warm, the air is warm, gives them the best chance for nesting. The next thing that they're looking at is the season. So beaches on windy days like today can be really dynamic in their shifts, with wave power and wind power kind of shifting how the beaches look. But typically in the spring and summer, they're a little less dynamic in these shifts. So they like to nest then. And last but not least, looking for beaches that are steep and have coarse sand. So sands that are a little bit thicker than sands you might see farther north. So those are the characteristics that they look for. And a cool thing about sea turtles, they're known to nest on the same beach that they hatch from, which is really cool. So they actually have crystals in their brain that detect magnetic fields, and that helps them navigate, kind of like the GPS does in your car, all the way back to where they emerged from, which is really cool. But once the mama has all of this figured out and she's ready to go, she'll arrive on our beach. And all of the species leave different tracks, so we can tell who decided to nest on our beach. So leatherbacks, again, they're that largest group of sea turtles that we see. It's pretty difficult for them to navigate on land. They weren't exactly made for that, and they can be really large. That's a lot of weight to haul up onto the sand. So they move in kind of what we call a breaststroke motion. So they move all their flippers simultaneously, all together. Now, green sea turtles do this as well, so they'll move simultaneously, but something that makes their tracks different is they're a little bit smaller. They move straight rather than in a wiggle pattern, and you can see their cute little tail drag mark in the sand. That's how you can tell a green sea turtle decided to nest. And lastly, loggerheads are a little more unique in their nesting style, or their arrival style rather. They use a freestyle motion. So you can tell this in the tracks because one part of it will farther up than the other. So that's how we can tell a loggerhead decided to nest. And our researchers are very expertly trained to be able to point out those tracks. So once they've arrived, the next thing that they want to do is what's called body hitting. Now this is when they're using all 4 of their flippers and their body, and they're kind of wiggling around, and she's throwing the sand about, and she's making this large pit that she will eventually construct her egg chamber in. Now, arrival and body pitting is typically the time that sea turtles will abandon their nesting attempts. So whether a human spooks them, a predator might spook them, or something just doesn't go right, they'll do what's called a false crawl, meaning they came up, they might have even started a body pit, but they've decided that the beach just isn't for them, and they'll turn around and they'll head back to the ocean. That's why it's really important, if you're lucky enough to find a nesting sea turtle, that you don't approach them, because they can be pretty easily spooked when they're this early in the nesting process. So once they make that body pit, the next thing that they're going to do is construct a nest, or the egg chamber. Now the egg chambers look really interesting. They kind of look like what you would expect a light bulb to look like. So she's reaching about 2 to 3 feet deep in the sand, into the nice damp sand. She's using her back flippers that are really dexterous. If you've ever looked at an x-ray of a sea turtle, their back flippers that act like they're rudders in the ocean kind of look like hands that we have. So they're able to slip the sand really nicely out to make it wider on the bottom and then smaller at the top, so that the eggs have a nice narrow part to go into. So they'll make that egg chamber. And the next thing that they do is depositing the eggs. Now, in a lot of our sea turtles, this is the noisy part, and they'll deposit anywhere from 80 to 120 eggs, depending on the species. Usually leatherbacks deposit a little bit less than our greens and our loggerheads do, but they all deposit on average about 80 to 120 ping-pong-sized eggs. Now again, the size of these eggs varies between species. Leatherbacks, being a lot larger animals, produce larger eggs, whereas green sea turtles and loggerheads produce roughly the same size of eggs. Now, you might be wondering if you've ever held an egg in your kitchen and you accidentally dropped it and it fell on the floor and it cracked. Eggs are typically really fragile. Sea turtle eggs are a little bit different because they're adapted to fall from the height from the sea turtle into the egg chamber that she just dug, which again is about 2 to 3 feet depending on the size of the turtle. So the eggs, if you were to hold one, are a little bit more rubbery and flexible so that when they fall into the egg chamber, they don't break. They also don't crush under the weight of their brothers and sisters that are laid on top of them. So the next thing that she'll do once she's laid all of her eggs is she will bury those eggs. So she's flinging sand back into the egg chamber to incubate them properly. And then she camouflages. So you might have heard of this word before in your science classes, but essentially this is her best line of defense to camouflage her nest or disguise it from predators or even humans, unfortunately, that might want to disturb the nest. So there's all sorts of predators on the beach, like crabs, or armadillos even, or other dogs. Raccoons are a pretty big culprit that would like to go into that nest and make those hatchlings their meal. So what the nesting mama likes to do is to fling sand every which way and kind of wig herself so that the nest is nice and disguised, so that sometimes even our researchers have a hard time telling where exactly that nest was laid. So it's a good line of defense for her because nesting females do not go back and check on this. And in fact, they'll nest about even 4 to 6 times in a given nesting season. So once she lays all of her eggs and she covers it up, she's good to go. She will go back out and she'll return to the ocean. But in most cases, unless it was her last nesting attempt for the season, she doesn't go very far. She'll go probably right along the continental shelf and wait, maybe mate with another male, and wait until she has eggs that she's ready to lay again and do the process all over again. Now, I mentioned earlier that she's migrating pretty far from her foraging grounds in order to do this, and then she has to haul herself up on the beach and do this whole process 4 to 6 times, which costs her a lot of energy. So sea turtles don't nest every single year. They might choose every other year so that they're able to rest and forage and then decide that they want to nest the following year. So they can sometimes take even 2 to 4 years to decide that they'd like to nest again. They're not actually able to nest until they reach maturity. So this is typically around 25 to 30 years old that sea turtles will reach maturity and decide that they're ready to mate and take on that long journey. So now that the eggs are under the and what's happening under there? So the mom is essentially using the beach as a temporary incubator for all of her hatchlings. And temperature of the sand plays a really big part in both their development and their emergence from the nest. So typically science likes to see about 82 to 89 degrees, the temperature of a nest, which is the best for incubating them and developing them properly. Anything warmer or cooler than that could cause issues that would result in them not developing properly. And the next thing that you might not know is that temperature actually determines the sex or the gender of the sea turtles that are in the nest. So I like to remember this by the phrase, hot chick, cool dude. And typically what this means is that warmer temperatures will produce a clutch of all females, with cooler temperatures producing a clutch of all males. And there is about a 29.5 degrees Celsius where they can have an even split of having males and females. So temperature plays a really big part in their gender. And lastly, it plays a really big part in their emergence. So typically, sea turtles want to both nest and emerge at night when they have that cover of darkness kind of helping them disguise themselves. And the hatchlings are able to tell this not by sight, they can't see that it's nighttime out, but the temperature will cool down at night enough to signal the hatchlings at the top that it's time to go. Now, before any of this happens, they have to get out of their egg first. So they use their egg tooth, or their caruncle, which is kind of a funny word. They use that to poke through their egg and to get out of the egg. Now, something that you might not know is that once they get out of the egg, they were kind of in like a sit-up position there. They're a little crunched up. So what they like to do is actually wait once they've gotten out of the egg and wait for their bottom shell, which is called their plastron, to flatten out a little bit more until they're ready to go. This will take about 2 to 3 days, and they've already incubated for about 2 to 3 months before this. Once all of that has happened and they're out of the egg, they've internalized their yolk for energy, they've hatched out of the egg and to go, that decrease in temperature will tell them that it's time to go to the ocean. And a really cool thing happens, it's called a boil. So the ones on the top will feel the drop in temperature first, and they'll start wiggling, and that'll cue the other ones to start wiggling, and they'll all start wiggling. So the best way for them to get out is with the help of their brothers and sisters, and they're all kind of emerge, what's called a boil, from their nest. Now, despite the fact that they all emerge together, seed finding is an individual sport. So they're not, the ones at the top aren't waiting for their brothers and sisters at the bottom before they make a dash for the ocean. They're looking for predators, and they're looking to get into the ocean as quickly as possible. Now, the best way we can tell that the hatchlings were successful in their race to the oceans is by the fan that they leave coming out of their nest. So we know that a narrow fan means that they weren't distracted by anything like flashlights or lights from the beach or any people or predators scaring them, and they were able to navigate safely right up to the ocean. Now, a more wide fan might tell us that something distracted the hatchlings and they might have gone the wrong way or just taken a longer route to go to the ocean. So a lot of things can disorient hatchlings in that process. So once they make it to the ocean, they're all to go. And hopefully, and the reason why sea turtles lay so many eggs is only 1 in 1,000 hatchlings will successfully make it to be an adult. So you might think that nesting mama parenting style is a little bit weird, but essentially why they lay so many eggs is so that they can give their young the best statistical chance to make it to adulthood. So I gave you a huge 101 on nesting and hatchling emergence, but we do have a pretty good chunk of time for questions if you guys have any questions in the chat.
Hi, yes, Emily, we do. Lindsay, did you want to do those questions, or I can pop some up here? We got a lot of questions from our students today. Let me go ahead and put some of these up here so we can recognize some of our students. So
Excellent.
JP asked why they like to lay the eggs in the sand.
That's a really good question. So the reason why they like to lay the eggs in the sand is it acts as a really excellent incubator for those eggs. So it can hold in heat really well, also compact enough to keep nests nice and safe. That's a really good question.
We have another question here. Do they nest during the day or at night?
That's a good question. So they're nocturnal nesters, typically. What this does is it gives them the cover of darkness so that they aren't as easily detected by any predators or humans or anything like that. Now, sometimes we'll see them nesting in the morning, but that's pretty unusual. Most of the time they have the internal body clock going and they can know that it's time to nest when night hits. It's a good question.
All right. Where do sea turtles live in the ocean?
This is a really good question. So it depends on what life stage that they're in. So sea turtles are aged from a hatchling to a juvenile to a subadult and to an adult. So when they're hatchlings, they actually like to hang out in what's called sargassum, which is floating mats of algae. So that's where they'll hang, and they'll eat. It's easy for them to rest on that floating algae, and then they'll usually migrate a handful of more miles offshore into what's called their foraging grounds. But sometimes they're known to forage closer to shore too. So it just kind of depends really on where their food source is and what their life stage is as to where they're hanging out.
All right. We got a question from Sam. How far deep do they swim in the ocean? So how deep can they dive?
This is a really good question. So the leatherback that I was talking about earlier is the largest of the sea turtles. Something that's really interesting about leatherbacks, as the name implies, is they don't have that hard shell like the other sea turtle species do, but it's a little more rubbery and leathery feeling. And what this allows them to do is to dive really deep into the ocean, because otherwise, if they had a hard shell, they would actually crack under the pressure. So pressure builds up as you dive deeper and deeper into the ocean. If you've ever looked at some scuba divers or watched them on TV, you might know that. So leatherbacks can dive 1,000 feet or even more in certain cases. And what they're doing is they're looking to track jellyfish. So jellyfish will move up and down in the water column, depending on what the sun is doing, so whether it's light or dark. And so what the leatherbacks are doing is chasing those guys, and so they have to dive pretty deep to get them sometimes. That's a really good question.
So we got a question here from Caden. How many turtles are there in the world?
Oh, so there are 7 species of turtle in the world. There's 5 that we see in Florida and 3 that nest on our beaches. Now, our hospital pretty commonly has loggerheads and greens. We sometimes see some hawksbill sea turtles. We're actually tracking a hawksbill sea turtle named Heidi right now. You can check her out where she is on our website. I believe she's in Miami at the moment. You can also see some Kemp's Ridleys, some olive Ridleys, and Australian flatbacks, and then leadbacks. But we don't typically see them in our hospital because they're such deep divers. They wouldn't do very well in a shallow hospital tank.
Awesome. We got a great question here. Are the turtles that are currently nesting enough to sustain the species?
Are they what? I didn't catch the end of the question.
Is it enough to keep the species going so it's not endangered?
This is a good question. This is what we would hope, right? But we have seen a decline in sea turtle populations, hence why they are considered endangered or threatened in a lot of spots in the world. But this does lead me to a good point of something you can do to be good ocean stewards and be mindful of our nesting mamas and our hatchlings during this time of year. So a big thing to do is if you are on the beach at night, that you're not using a light from your cell phone or any flashlights or things like that, because this light can disorient hatchlings that use the reflection from the moon to navigate towards the ocean. Another big thing you can do is when you're at the beach and you bring all your cool chairs, your toys, and things like that, that you bring those with you at the end of the day, as those can be pretty big obstacles to nesting mamas. And if they do see those chairs, they don't think they can navigate around them, they'll turn back around. It's not good. We don't want to see as many false crawls as we do. You can also pick up litter that you see, so sometimes that can be easily ingested or even entangled in hatchlings that are emerging from the nest. These are all really big things you can do to be ocean stewards of our hatchlings. Also, if you're on beachfront property, turning those lights off, keeping everything nice and dark. Now, something that's a little tricky is the beaches in Palm County are open 24/7. What you don't want to be doing is going out and looking for nesting sea turtles. Now, if you do happen to get lucky and you're walking the beach at night with your family and you see one, the best thing to do is remain quiet and stay at a distance away from the turtle. So like I said earlier, the turtles can get really easily spooked by anything that might look like a predator, so you standing over them would kind of be in that predator stance, right? So we don't want harming those sea turtles in any way. So the best thing to do is to leave nature to do its thing and observe from a distance and take that cool experience with you.
Awesome. All these questions are coming in so fast. I'm trying to grab some. Let's see. Here we go. Carmen wants to know what beach here would we find most turtles? Like Juno Beach?
Yeah, Juno Beach is a great place to start. We're actually one of the most densely populated nesting sites in the entire world. So Juno Beach is a great place to start if you're looking for sea turtles. You can also come check out our facility and see our patients.
Oh, that wasn't the one I want. What predators do turtles have?
So this depends a little bit on their life stage, like I was talking about earlier. Hatchlings can either get eaten by larger fish when they're in the ocean, or if they're still on land emerging and getting to the ocean, they can be eaten by all sorts of things like raccoons, armadillos, even wild pigs, some shorebirds that might be on the beach, even dogs. Anything like that would like to make a hatchling its meal. But when they're out in the ocean, typically what we see in terms of predator interaction injuries is via a shark bite. So shark bites typically will happen to their flippers or their extremities that aren't covered by that shell. And sometimes we see rake marks on their shell. So it does kind of look like those, if a rake was taken to their carapace or the top of their shell. We can see that by marine mammals like dolphins or other animals like that. They have a handful of predators that will try and get them. But they do have that nice and protective shell that helps them a lot. And they're actually able to move faster than you might think. If they're trying to evade a predator, sea turtles can move at about 20 miles per hour in the water. So they can move pretty fast if they need to.
We got a question here actually for you, Emily. How did you get interested in this work and this job?
Oh, that's a really cool question. So I've loved the beach since I was little. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to the beach just about every summer and go see it. I always had a scientific mind. I was always outside exploring, picking up rocks, looking at bugs, all sorts of things. And my parents noticed this and were able to foster me into getting into science clubs and science classes when I was younger. Once I got to college, I knew I really wanted to do marine biology. So I majored in environmental science and marine science, got degrees in that. And then headed down here because I taught a lot in North Carolina and on the coast more north of here, but I'd never been on south before, and I knew that turtles were my passion. That's how I ended up here.
Very cool. Isabel is asking, which species of turtle is the most endangered at this time?
Mm. So hawksbills are pretty rare. Also, our ridleys are pretty rare. So hawksbills face a lot of issues from poaching. So their shell, if you've ever seen tortoise shell pattern on certain things, is was pretty commonly poached back in the day. It's now illegal now under CITES, which protects endangered species from such things. But they used to be really, really endangered back in the day because people would do their shell. And also our ridleys are pretty rare. They nest in what's called arybata, meaning they nest all at once. And they do kind of have that safety in numbers to some degrees, but also people can time that. They can be easily poached by that avenue as well because they're all nesting at the same time.
This is an interesting question, and I want to know the answer to this one too. Can sea turtles see in color?
Oh, this is a good question. I got nervous there for a second. So the reason actually, if you've ever seen sea turtle researchers in pictures or videos and they're using red light, because they can't see red light, because red actually penetrates the least in the blue ocean. So they're adapted to see blue and all sorts of colors in the ocean, but when they get on land, they cannot see very well. We actually have a really cool instrument that we use in our facility to illustrate that to people, where you through and see like how a sea turtle sees, and they are not seeing much when they're on land. So they're definitely more adapted to see colors that are in the ocean, and they can't see red, which is why if our researchers are out, they'll use flashlights like that. That's a good question.
All right. Joshua is asking, do turtles get sand in their eyes?
They do. They do get sand in their eyes, so they are flinging that sand around. Something also interesting about their eyes that you've just reminded me of is it's a great way for them to excrete salt. So if they have too much salt built up in their bodies from eating animals in the ocean and they're swallowing that salt water, when they get on land, they'll actually kind of look like they're crying. They're not crying. What they're doing is they're expelling salt, special glands in their eyes that run down their faces. So they have pretty special eyes, but I'm sure they do complain about the sand.
Yeah, we all do at the beach sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Got a question here from Catalina. How fast do turtles swim, and how fast do they walk on land?
So they can swim upwards of 20 miles per hour in the ocean. So they have those front flippers that kind of act like they're paddles. They're a lot larger. Back flippers will act like they're rudders, and this is what allows them to propel themselves pretty quickly through the water, especially when they're provoked by a predator or anything. Now on land, they do not move very fast, especially our leatherbacks that are very large. That is a lot of weight to be hauling up onto the beach at one time. So typically an arrival process might take even 15 minutes in some cases if they're stopping to catch their breath. And on the way down, there's a steep slope, so it'll take a little bit less time. But they're not on land for very long. They don't want to. It's pretty tough for them to be moving on land. So they're not very land adapted to move very fast.
We got a question here from Wilney. Would like to know how turtles can camouflage themselves from predators.
So loggerheads actually have a really cool way of doing this. So they can plaster on their carapace, so the top of their shell, what's called epibiota. And if there's too much of it, it can cause an issue for them and kind of weigh them down. But if there's a healthy amount of it and they're resting on the bottom of the seafloor, they kind of just look like a rock that's hanging out on the bottom of the ocean. That's a really cool way for loggerheads to disguise themselves. And a lot of them will adapt that tactic if they're just hanging out on the bottom. So they can kind of look like a rock in the bottom of the ocean or a coral reef. That's the best way that they can camouflage themselves.
What is the average lifespan for a sea turtle these days?
This is a good question. So sea turtles will live around 7 to 80 years, depending if things go well. We one time had a patient in our hospital that was over 100, which taught our veterinarians a lot about geriatric turtle care, so how to care for older turtles. So sometimes we see turtles that are pretty old.
All right, we got a tough one here from Aiden. He's asking, where did the name for turtles come from?
So these scientists are not exactly the most creative, right? So loggerhead comes from the fact that they have a large head. Leatherback comes from the fact that their back feels leathery. Hawksbills are named that because their bill looks like a hawk. It's what allows them to eat sponges in tiny crevices in coral reefs. And green sea turtles are named green sea turtles, not because they look outwardly green necessarily, but because they eat seagrass and algae that actually makes their insides and their body fat green because they've ingested so much chlorophyll. So sometimes scientists are pretty straightforward with the way that we name things. That could take you one more question.
Oh, one more. That makes it tough on me to pick the. There's so many questions. Let's see if we can find a nice one. Let's see. I saw there's so many good questions here. I'm sorry if your question didn't get answered. You can definitely contact Loggerhead or visit their facility, and they'll be happy to talk to you for as long as you want. How about this?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, this one, and then we'll go into your programming. How long can sea turtles last in water without coming up for air?
Ooh, this is a good one. So sea turtles have lungs just like we do. They have nostrils just like we do. So they do have to come up to the surface to breathe air. Now, if you've ever ran around a little bit too hard and you're breathing heavily, so sometimes if they're showing a lot of activity, they'll be coming up for air pretty often. But assuming they're just resting and acting normally, they can actually hold their breath for 4 to 7 hours if they need to. And what this allows them to do is to be able to rest underneath the waves without having to come up for a breath every so often. That's a good question. And if you have more questions that we didn't get to today, we do have some frequently asked questions that we've already answered on our website. You can also check out our recordings from the virtual coastal classroom. We have all sorts of lesson plan questions, or you can come visit me at Loggerhead Marinelife Center.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you, Lindsay. We always love partnering with Loggerhead Marinelife Center. It's a wonderful facility. If you get the opportunity to head up to Juno Beach, you can see some of the turtles that are being rehabilitated that they then release into the ocean. It's just a great place in our community. Thank you so much, Emily. I'm going to come back to you in just a minute to say goodbye after we do a little bit of programming here. We do have some more virtual learning experiences coming up this week and next week. This week's schedule, we have 2 businesses in our community, Erica's Plumbing, today at 1 p.m. and we're going to be coming to you live from the Tesla dealership on the 10th at 10:15. We have also partnered with the Palm Beach County Library System, and they're going to be sharing their programming. With the K-5 is tomorrow at 11, and for our 6-8 secondary, we're going to be back with them on the 10th at 2 p.m. Our schedule is available at the edtechtraining.palmbeachschools.org website, so feel free to check it out and see what's coming up next week as well. Also, just want to plug this in while you're here, teachers. We're having a back to school tech talk July 29th, and we'll be giving out more information on that a little bit down the road, and it'll also be on our website. And then looking ahead, our 2021 technology conference, the theme is Fast Forward, a decade of change in a year. It's going to be October 15th, 2021. Both the Tech Talk and the Technology Conference will be virtual this year, so you'll be able to enjoy it from your classroom or your home, and we're going to have a lot of great sessions for that. So we do hope you'll join us, teachers. Thank you so much from the entire Educational Technology team. We appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much, students, for your great questions. We look forward to seeing you this afternoon. Thank you very much. I'll bring Emily back up to say thank you, and then we're out. Emily, Lindsay, once again, you blew it out of the water, literally. We really appreciate you being here. I learned so much. I know everyone here did as well. We just appreciate
thank you guys so much. Yeah, it was so much fun teaching you guys today. You all asked some fabulous questions. Please come visit me at Loggerhead Marinelife Center. We would love to have you and show you our patients that we have. Happy World Oceans Day, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.